Hi, I'm Wendy. Welcome to my Westcoast garden. Today I'm going to talk about tomato transplants. This is the first of 3 videos I'm going to do on transplants. I will do another one on zucchini and then one more on peppers. So today, tomatoes. Tomatoes are one of the vegetables that people like to grow the very most in their garden. I'm growing tomatoes because they're the worst possible produce that you can buy in the grocery store. Kale's pretty good, romaine's not too bad, but tomatoes in the grocery store, they don't taste anything like the delicious produce that comes out of your garden. That's probably because tomatoes are really tender, and so they're picked when they're underripe. They're put in a refrigerated truck in Mexico or California, and then they're shipped to where I am in Vancouver, Canada, in a couple of days. And by the time they get to the grocery store shelf, they've been refrigerated, they've been ripened off the vine, and they really don't have very much flavor. Hothouse tomatoes are a little bit better, and especially where I live, the hothouses are out in Delta, and so they're not too bad in terms of how long it takes to ship them, but there's still nothing like the tomato that you get in your garden. Luckily, tomatoes are not really that hard to grow. If you have watched my other videos on preparing your soil, then you're in a great starting place. You just really need to add the plant and some water and some sunshine. Tomatoes like a pH that's a little bit on the acidic side, so the native soil on the West Coast is pretty good for them. What I do is I lime the soil, I plant Brasilics year 1, and then year 2 I plant the tomato. Tomatoes are a warm weather crop. There's no point in planting them too early. They just won't produce. They'll just sit in the ground and do basically nothing. So you want to wait until the air temperature is above 70 degrees Fahrenheit or about 20 Celsius, and that the nighttime temperature, and this is important where I am, is above 15 degrees Celsius or 60 Fahrenheit. Today is Cinco de Mayo, May 5th, and the nighttime temperatures are just starting to get into the double digits. So it really doesn't make sense to plant in Canada much before Mother's Day, or even wait until the 3rd weekend in May, which is the May long weekend here to celebrate Queen Victoria's birthday. In most of Canada, that's an indication of when the last frost date is. In Vancouver, the last frost date came and went months ago, but it really doesn't warm up much before mid to late May that anything that's a warm weather crop is going to be able to produce. So the other thing about tomatoes is they like it to stay warm, and where I live we only get about 77 days on average that are above 20 degrees, and even within that we don't get hardly any days that are above 30 degrees. Keeping a warm enough temperature is a bit tricky on the West Coast where I live. So I've created some microclimates in my yard, which I will get into in another video. There are 2 types of tomatoes. They're determinate and indeterminate. Indeterminate just keep producing throughout the season until it gets too cold. Determinate produce just one crop. There's something like 7,500 different varieties of tomatoes to choose from, and so it's pretty easy to pick ones that fit how you use tomatoes, whether you want to do a lot of canning, whether you want to pick ripe cherry tomatoes to throw into salads, and also depending on where you live. I know where I live, the local seed company Westcoast Seeds produces varieties that do really well in our West Coast climate that has a very few, as I've said, warm days and a lot of rain in July that brings on blights. So there are special tomato hybrid varieties and open pollinated varieties that just do really well in my particular climate. This year I'm going to go 3 varieties of cherry tomatoes, which are indeterminate, and as well as a Roma and a Manitoba, which are both determinate varieties. The Manitoba I'm going to plant in pots inside my greenhouse and set up a drip irrigation system to make sure they're watered evenly. The cherry I'll put outside in the raised beds because they'll ripen more or less throughout the season. There'll be lots that are ripe before it starts raining and getting colder later in the summer. I've never grown Roma before, but I'm hoping that their tougher skins and smaller size will help them to ripen outside before the blight that July rains bring in our soggy West Coast. So I started these seedlings inside under lights a couple of months ago. They are more than ready to go into the ground now. If you do a Google search on tomatoes, there are lots of things you can see that gardeners do, kind of home remedies to help their tomatoes grow better. If you Google any of those things with site:/edu on the end of your search, you can research how accurate any of those claims might be from a scientific point of view. The Washington State University in Seattle has a great myth-busting series that I'll link to below. In Canada, we don't have the resources that are available through the U.S. land-grant university, so I really appreciate those resources from south of the border. And for those of you in other regions in Canada, just, do a search of whatever the closest U.S. city is, and if they're a land-grant university, they're likely to have some good information there. Personally, I like to add a little epsom salt to the planting hole. It's pretty common in soil in areas with a heavy rainfall, like where I live, that the soil will be deficient in magnesium, which is in the epsom salts. I don't add eggshells or eggs. I've tried it in the past, as I've also tried milk powder, but the soil where I live, it's likely not calcium deficient, and even if it were, I am not convinced that the eggshells break down quickly enough for the plants to be able to access calcium. Most soils have calcium in them. It's just that the roots need to have regular water and be able to reach down into the native soil deep enough that they can access that calcium. Tomatoes are high users of phosphorus, which is the middle number on the 3 numbers that you see in fertilizer. So I add a handful of bone meal and sometimes a handful of organic fertilizer with a higher middle number into the planting hole with the Epsom salt. And that's it. Add a tomato cage or some kind of stake that the tomato can climb on, and save a little pruning, which I'll go over in a future video once the plants are a little bigger. You're good to go. Thanks for watching. Good luck growing your tomatoes this year.